Hi, everyone. This is the acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today I'm taking a look at Mercury and Venus getting together in Gemini while both are squaring Neptune, and Venus is retrograde right now. So I have this circled as one of my main transits of the week, so I wanted to spend some time with it. Let me show you what it looks like first, and then we're going to dive into talking about it. So first of all, you can see that right about Thursday into Friday of this week, Mercury is going to conjoin with Venus while they are in Mercury's domicile. So Mercury is pretty strong, but they're both going to square Neptune simultaneously. Now, this happens between Thursday and Friday, right as the new moon is coming in. I'm doing a separate video about the new moon this week, so take a look at that separately. But this is a pretty potent moment, considering what's happening in the lunar cycle, considering the aspects that are starting to form and things like that. So let's take a look and break it down. What happens when Mercury and Venus get together, and what happens when they're both square to Neptune? We could also bracket off and be like Venus retrograde in particular. So, okay. Now, some of this I went over at the very beginning of the month. When I do my monthly overview, I often cover different elements of these transits. So I do recommend going back and listening to the whole Venus retrograde series that I did. I think it was a 4-part series. And then also taking a look at the talk that I did. Let's see. No, it was in that retrograde series. Yeah, I was going to say there's one I did on retrogrades, but it fell into that series. So yeah, watch that whole series and watch the overview for the month of May, and you'll get just a little, you'll get more information about the same topic as well if you want a little extra. So first of all, you're taking Mercury Hermes and Venus Aphrodite, and you're also taking Neptune. And Neptune doesn't have like an easy correlate in the Greek pantheon. Maybe it would be Poseidon, but Neptune doesn't seem to have a lot to do with the god it was named after, except for maybe the association with the ocean or water. But at any rate, Mercury, of course, is going to be the god of speech, communication, the intellect, the written word. But so much more than that, Mercury was related with kind of like highways and byways and travel and transit and buses and subways and planes and cars and the internet and just places where there's a lot of information traveling across all sorts of different spaces or boundaries. Mercury can be in the upper world, Mercury can be in the lower world, masculine or feminine. Mercury's common. You see it everywhere. So Mercury is also related to the magician, and Mercury is the traditional legendary founder, Hermes, of astrology itself. So Mercury has this real esoteric magician side, almost a little trickstery. And then Mercury also has this kind of rational, analytical, kind of data information side. Both are really important. And so I'm going to mention elements of the mercurial archetype that kind of cover both. But then you've also got Venus, goddess of love, beauty, harmony, friendship, agreement, pleasant things, sexuality, the arts, women, friends, sisters. So those two getting together are really nice. The two of them combined, I've talked about a little bit already. Oh, now I remembered. When I talk about, when I look at Venus in the Venus series, I do a Venus in Gemini, and that could actually be good for understanding this one as well. So I knew I was missing one video. So look back at that one if you feel like it. But anyway, Mercury, Venus, when they get together, have this combination of being playful and beautiful. They can be, for example, someone who does, what am I thinking of, graphic design or any kind of combination of beauty, design, intelligence, rationality, technical skill. So like you think about DJs or anyone who can make something beautiful out of something kind of fun and quirky. I also think about, there was this show when I was a kid. You guys probably, some of you probably remember it, and it took further or future like iterations or something, but it was called Double Dare. Do you guys remember that show? So there'd be these things that happen. I don't remember exactly how it worked, but there'd be dare, double dare, physical challenge. they'd have this obstacle course with all these crazy games, and there was slime, I think. And anyway, Venus and Mercury are very much also about games and gaming and a kind of childhood, quirky, curious thing that happens when Venus comes into Geminis. People often get obsessed with like word puzzles or games from childhood or cards, or so you can notice this kind of playful element to Venus and Mercury. And it's also great for, whether it's writing or learning something or writing music or speaking fluidly or pleasantly, or having a lot of, having a fun, stimulating conversation, almost like the buzz of a coffee house. So you get the idea. Now, Mercury and Venus together are cooperating, and Venus is getting a lot because Mercury is in Venus's sign. So I mentioned when I did the Venus retrograde video, this Venus retrograde, though Venus retrogrades will often mean that there's a process of reversal, or, sometimes people say you're a little bit more inward turning in whatever area of life Venus is impacting, whether it's your work or your romantic relationships, wherever it lands in your chart. But Venus can also have, during a retrograde, can really kind of be difficult for us. It can bring up a lot of shadows and hardships and pain in some ways, and suffering relative to, again, the house that Venus is in, or relative to our relationships. They're not always easy. I went through one of the worst breakups in my life during a Venus retrograde when I was younger. Anyway, so the reason that it's nice to have Mercury around is that when Venus is retrograde and has good association with its host, it's like, I'm going through something, but I'm hanging out at your house and you've got a well-stocked fridge, and like a cool place to hang out or something like that. So, Venus is getting some help right now from Mercury, and that's a big plus. It typically means that you're going to have, for example, a interpretation for Venus retrograde, whatever house it's in your chart right now. For example, if it was in your 10th house of career, you might say, okay, might be some delays or some reversals or changes of circumstance, maybe slightly dramatic in the career house, but overall this should be good. And you should feel that there's a silver lining in the midst of this, or that there is some positive changes that come about, even if there are also delays or some unexpected events. And that would be all relative to career between, say, April and August. Now, one of the reasons I feel so confident to make that kind of interpretation versus like, oh, looks like everything's hitting the fan in your career house as Venus is retrograde in there, is just the gist of it is that when Mercury is supporting Venus, it's good. We just had Mercury in Taurus, where there's mutual reception with Venus, and now in Gemini. So that's just a lot of support for Venus. All right. So because of that, again, you're thinking of the more constructive mixing and mingling of Venus and Mercury. There can be some darker sides to Venus and Mercury, such as gossip, trivial information and pettiness, distraction with superficial things, unrealistic expectations or flirtations that lead nowhere or that even hurt a person. So there can be like things like that, or just kind of like a shallow multiplicity or something. And those can be shadows, but really you're getting more of the better Venus Mercury right now. Like, I'm going to sit down and just very fluidly, write this first chapter of a book I've been wanting to write my whole life, or something along the lines of that. But it can also have us revisiting and almost being more reflective about words, language, thoughts, ideas, technology. For example, I've got Venus and Mercury in my second house, which is the financial house. And I've been, as it was turning retrograde and Mercury was just kind of coming into Gemini, I was sitting there going like, maybe I want to get a new microphone. I love this microphone, don't get me wrong, and it's blue, and I love my Krishna blue. But anyway, I was looking at microphones, and I was looking at, I think it was called a Shure. Another friend of mine uses this other podcasting microphone, and I like the quality of his mic. And so I've been thinking about that, right? And other things that could touch up my technology game, make it more aesthetically pleasing. I was specifically thinking about my voice and, the use of my voice in my videos and stuff like that. So, but it paused, and I was like, oh, I've got it. It's Venus Mercury, Venus Mercury both together. This would cost a chunk of change to buy this new mic and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, let me just think about it and do a little bit of research, because I know that Venus is retrograde. So it could be, for example, that I take a little bit of time to research it over the Venus retrograde and then eventually make the purchase or whatever. And it actually comes out to be very beneficial. Or maybe I'll decide that wouldn't greatly upgrade my game. I don't know. So, but either way, the idea is that this kind of like, if I'm reflecting on that with the same thing in mind here, that Mercury Venus connection is probably going to give me the intelligence and reflectiveness and, let's just say, research skill to find the right answer, whatever that case might be. We'll see. I'm saying this live now, and you're going to hear my crappy mic in 3 months and be like, dude, you're so wrong about that. But anyway, but the point is that Venus and Mercury together are more constructive right now. I wanted to start and really drive that point home, because when you combine it with Neptune, it really jacks with that connection. I mean, it really changes it. And I shouldn't say, I say jack with it. It means it's not almost, so it's like, it's not going to mess it up too bad. Sorry. It might, but it's generally going to be like, you have Mercury and Venus as a very positive anchor helping one another during this moment of the retrograde. The square to Neptune really affects it. It really changes the nature of it. It's not the same Venus Mercury that you would think about normally. So what does it add to the picture? Well, when you get Neptune in the mix, of course, you're adding this kind of transcendental, imaginative, otherworldliness, this desire for underlying unity or fusion, the search or hope for redemption or Edenic salvation, like you're reaching for something beyond, or trying to feel the subtle, imminent transcendence right here that's, flowing through all things like the force or something like that. You're wanting to connect with more than the gross, or the physical with Neptune typically. And that can also get you into trouble, because it can also mean not being, just fuzzy thinking. And also it can just sort of wash us away and have very little respect for healthy boundaries, rationally, physically, etc. So you've got those energies of Neptune now coloring this transit in a big way. All right. So, for example, let's just use my example with the camera. I could decide, sometime during all of this, it would be very tempting for me to be like, well, you know what? Maybe I should just get this movie camera, like some really expensive, like crazy thing. And I'm like, yeah, I need like a studio grade, movie camera to film. And like, I could go completely, delusional or whatever. So, and no offense to people who know, if you know something about cameras, I do not know. I'm imagining that they're very expensive, but so at any rate, and then I could just be taken by that totally. And where Mercury and Venus may sort of, like, they're giving me something nice, or they're helping me research and find something. It turns out that, a camera that was, say, I don't know, half as expensive would have been just fine. And will this flashy thing that I delusionally, got sucked into purchasing, will it make my game better? Sure, it'll make it great, but not, it's great enough to warrant, I could have gotten the one that was half as expensive and nobody would have known the difference. Do you know what I mean? So you have to be really careful, because there'll be this presentation potentially of something that's sort of dreamy and good and beautiful, and oh my gosh, this is great. And it could be that there's just some way in which it's inflated or exaggerated. And it's not that it's going to hurt us, but it's that it's unnecessary, or it's frivolous, or we're getting too high on something. So that's the way I'm gauging this, is like helpful, but could also go to a kind of extravagant or glamorous extreme. So that's, I think, the general read on this. Now let's break down some of the individual things that you could see. Well, there was this, when I was living in Manhattan when I very first started my astrology career. When I very first started, and it was great. I really enjoyed just the hustle and bustle of Manhattan, and reading for people in coffee shops and my apartment, and just like all sorts of really crazy stories that I had too, like some really colorful people that were just like, just nutty and really interesting and fun. And like I'll never forget all of my readings in Manhattan. But anyway, you know, there was this one time where I got invited to a party, a birthday party for this woman. And she wanted me to like read charts for like her and her friends, and it was like I think it was a 40th birthday party. And at that time I had just turned 30. So these were mostly like 40 somethings at this party, if I remember correctly. Anyway, so it was like I felt like a little in over my head. I was just like this young astrologer that was just starting. And the crowd was like, I don't want to say Plutonian, or maybe you could even say that they were just super subterranean in some way. They're all very beautifully dressed, but all looking like, black widows that might want to like mate with you and then like kill you or something like that. I was just like, so it was, I mean, it was just not my scene. You know what I mean? I'm not talking about just the women. I'm talking about the men and the women. It was a very mixed party. But anyway, so so, so there was like this, there's just this vibe of just kind of like, oh, you know who it reminds me of? Sorry, you know what it reminds me of is, it reminds me of Night at the Roxbury. You know, those kind of like creepy, nerdy, weird guys. Okay, anyway, so it was like that, and I was at this party, and I was in this back room, and I was doing readings at this like little table that they had like put this like a shawl or tapestry over, and there was right next to me there was an Asian woman. I don't know where she was from, and she did not speak any English whatsoever. This was on the Upper West Side in Manhattan, and she was doing massages in one of those chairs that you sit down on, you know. So she was doing chair massages, and I like tried to, you know, talk with her, and she tried to let me know like, I don't speak English, sorry. And I was like, okay. So, you know, I'm sitting there. It was a really awkward situation, obviously, because these people are coming in, and progressively as the evening went on, they're getting more and more wasted, and I'm sitting there like giving them these readings. Um, at that moment, well, I'll tell the rest of this really funny part that comes up. So anyway, that like everyone was like more and more drunk, and it was a really awkward conversation. Because I'd be sitting there like trying to talk to them about their lives, and they were like loud and boisterous. Well, someone else was like getting rubbed like right next to me. I was like, how does this even make any sense? You know, like I'm sure they want to relax, and they don't want to hear you like drunkenly rambling on, or they don't want to hear me like, you know, talking to this person. So anyway, it was this really weird situation. Nobody seemed to care, and I just felt like the only one. And then the birthday girl, by the end of it, tried to. I had a girlfriend at the time, so I was like, no, thank you. But yeah, she totally tried to hook up with me at the end of the evening. She was like, why don't you just stay around and tell my fortune? I was like, no, I gotta peace out. You know, my girlfriend's waiting at home. So anyway, I'll never forget that. Why am I telling you this story? Because it is classic Venus, Mercury, Neptune. If you are in the holistic arts of any kind and you suddenly get dragged into something that feels like a total cheapening of something that should be spiritual. Like I felt like a straight up, you know, like I felt like I was a magician at a birthday party, you know, basically. And it was very beautiful. It was really wealthy. Like they paid me a lot of money and stuff like that. But I was like, this is not cool. Like this is, so Venus, Mercury, Neptune, be careful of the way that something spiritual is sort of sexualized and tried to be sold or cheapened in some way. That's really a big one with Mercury, Venus, and Neptune, because Mercury is also the god of merchants and of markets, and Venus is, of course, Venus, Mercury have a lot to do with advertising and marketing and PR and stuff like that. And so you can try to make something that's spiritual or artistic or anything just hypersexualized and sort of hedonistic, just really involved with like money or greed or like vanity. So you do have to be careful of that. All right, so that's a big one to watch for. And then you also have on the opposite side, have you ever like, I've had this happen a few times in my life with clients or just like people I meet, where when I hear them speak, I'm like, I don't think you're from here. Like something about their voice, and it makes you feel like they're either like a fairy or like an elf, or you know, like so there's some kind of creature, or you know what, you don't know. But that way that a person's voice may capture us and almost hypnotize or intoxicate us, whether it's a singer or someone you meet randomly, people sometimes just have that power over us, where it's like just a voice or a sound, even sacred sound of any kind, can be a Venus, Mercury, Neptune dynamic. Be careful, of course, of intoxication, always potential with Neptune in the mix. We can also be really idealistic about who we love, about why we love, about why we should be loved. So the shoulds, the oughts, the needs, the wants, the longings can get pretty extreme romantically, sexually, etc. So do on the other hand, it can be a great time to almost like, you know, fall in love or flirt or just find that spontaneous level of attraction in life in general, like whether it's something artistic or it's something romantic or whatever. we obviously know that as Venus has been in Gemini, whenever I talk about Venus and Gemini or Mercury and Gemini, I end up going on the most random tangents and like hopping all over the place, and it's really fun. But I'm sure for some of you, it's like, God, just talk, stay on topic. So, so anyway, you go to a dreamy imagination and attractive mind. What attracts us mentally, verbally, intellectually, and also the ability for words and thoughts to easily transport to another dimension. Romantic songs, influences, and moods, a feeling of divine discontent. Also, deceptive friendliness. This one is a really good one because, and I pulled this one from Ren Butler's book, which I always try to make sure that I mention him, but I can't mention him enough. He wrote a book called what is it called? Gosh, why do I always forget it? Oh no. Oh no. Ren. I don't know. It's sitting around here. Ah, here it is. There it was. Sorry. The Archetypal Universe by Ren Butler. Great book. Deceptive friendliness. It's one of the ones that he mentions under this transit. And the reason it's a good one is because Mercury and Venus can be quite friendly and quite talkative and chatty and fun. But you know, like if you're at someplace and someone's trying to sell you something and you're having fun with them, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, you're trying to sell something to me, right? Like that. Okay, so if it, you know, it can be, and sometimes it's you know, it's the harmless banter of a marketplace. You know, it's the exchange, the negotiating, the bartering, and the playfulness of it. So that kind of those are a duality that you can see as well. Deceptive friendliness can mean that someone is really nice, but they're, you know, they're or like a robotic in some way underneath the surface. Like, did you ever see the I want to say it was like the Stepford Wives, or even like some of the scenes in what's that show? I watched the first season of it and I stopped, but Westworld, I think that's what it's called. So it's like almost like the humanness or soul or real personality of someone may be hidden under some level of friendliness. That doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean it's good. It just means you may not see everything that there is to see when Venus and Mercury are there. Like whatever, like a lot of people don't realize, for example, that like this frustrates me personally, is that, you know, I have like an on-camera personality, and people will sometimes almost like imagine that the way that I am on camera is just who I am 24/7. Anyone who's on YouTube or who has, I don't know, done any acting or theater in your life or something like that, like sometimes people will just, or your job, you're like, you're a scholar or something, and everyone's like, oh, you know, you must be like, you must just love to talk about intellectual things all the time, you know. And this, you know, assumptions that we make because of roles that people play in the world, basically, that can be a difficult part of you know, any Neptune dynamic in a person's chart, is that they may be good at something, but the way that they project an image of something can be very different than who they are. What strong Neptune contacts often like that. Anyway, the deceptive friendliness thing is, we could just say it more broadly speaking, it's not seeing someone clearly, or not quite seeing them for who they are. And with that can go gossip, betrayal, you know, deceit or deception, you know, sleight of hand, stuff like that. So now finally, maybe the most like mundane level of this, you start thinking about some mundane predictions, and you get the potential for there to be scandals or loss or gossip or even death, or even something as serious as like taking one's own life with the Venus, Mercury, and Neptune dynamic, which could, you know, like this particular combination, it wouldn't be surprising to me to see like the death of like a more famous woman, for example, or an artist. When Venus was first square Neptune, for example, there was a country musician artist that was pretty famous that just died. That just happened as Venus conjoined Neptune for the first, or Venus squared Neptune for the first time. So you do have the potential for there to be, you know, Neptune can represent the desire to leave, to get out of here. The divine discontent can be very, very painful for people sometimes, whether it's in relationships or just psychologically, just feeling like I'm just not meant for this world. So Venus Neptune can bring that up, and sometimes will signify, you know, especially then you get a little bit, you piece it together a little bit, like Venus Neptune can be like a famous woman or a famous celebrity or a famous artist or something, like that. Then sometimes you're also going to see the combination of Venus, Neptune, and Mercury, for example, famous fashion brands or designers and things happening to them. For example, when Venus and started coming into this aspect with Neptune, J. Crew filed bankruptcy. Right. So you have these elements also where there can be dissolution or loss that's often more difficult around Venus Mercury things, which is going to be like, maybe technology, communication, also women, artists, anything that's Venusian, friends, so forth. So you can also see that the same exact themes coming together in a more, say, humanitarian or globally compassionate way. Mercury, Venus, Neptune is the humanitarian effort made by a woman or by a famous artist again. And you're thinking of that because Venus, when Venus was square to Neptune again, the very weekend that I first did that video series, Beyonce ended up giving or doing some big charitable effort that was like on the headlines of the news, and it had to do with Beyonce and COVID-19. So that was Venus Neptune. There's this kind of uplifting, humanitarian, compassionate outpouring of some kind, and that can be with celebrities, artists, women, and so forth. It could also have something to do with women in the news or women in media, or artists in the media. Again, I combine those two pretty loosely, like artistic, creative sorts, or possibly like women. Those would be two great Venusian signifiers. But also, this may have something to do with questions about gender or, identity politics can be a part of this, just discussions in that realm, let's say, because Mercury and Venus are conversational about, say, sex and gender. And then there's that kind of, larger spiritualizing, potentially blurring quality of Neptune in the mix. So you could see some of that in the media in the next, they'll say the next week. So anyway, that's some of what I have for you today. I didn't have much more than that. I just wanted to get you tuned back into this Mercury, Venus, Neptune dynamic. I will be talking about the new moon this week as well. So I hope you enjoy that and all the other videos that I'm putting out right now. Remember that my class, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic, starts on June 14th. There's still room. We haven't closed the class this year because of COVID-19. Actually, we've made it available through need-based tuition as well. So you can check that out if you need it. Early bird rate's still in effect. You can look at it, look it all over on my website, which is nightlightastrology.com. All right. I hope you guys are having a good one. Talk to you soon. Bye.